Hey, this is Troutbitten. Thanks for joining me. Today, let's talk about long leaders. Let's think about design and composition, about material diameter and stiffness. So mono rigs, Euro rigs, tight line and contact rigs. There are differences in all these things. But for our purposes today, if what you have hanging off the end of your fly rod, if what's outside of your rod guides is the leader only, or even if it's just a thin Euro nymphing fly line, then it really pays to understand that the leader build affects all of your possibilities for how you will fish. Are you ready? Let's talk about it. So leader design is always a compromise between two basic things, power versus drag. So for fly anglers, power in a leader means the leader can push the fly to the target. It also means the leader can push itself to the target. You can cast it. Power in a leader can also mean like the tippet is more powerful. Maybe you want a stronger tippet, I don't know, fight bigger fish, or for abrasion resistance. But with that extra power, almost always comes thickness, and that creates drag. It creates drag on the surface, and it also creates drag underneath. Thicker diameters create more drag. So let's acknowledge that fly fishing often requires a dead drift, and that's when drag matters the most. Now think about this. If you take a dry fly, for example, and you attach it to 6X tippet, a number 14 dry fly, 6X tippet, you can, if you cast right, you can often get swirls and S-curves, and the fly can drift naturally, drag-free over the surface. If you take that same number 14 dry fly and attach it to the same length of now 2X tippet, it's much harder to get that drag-free drift because 2X is going to drag more than 6X. And again, the same thing happens under the water. When we put 2X under the water, it drags more, or it has the potential to drag more than 6X. So let's take that same concept above the water now. Use a thicker leader build, and you'll see that the heavier material, the thicker material, will sag more. And that has the potential to create drag. Too much sag, you can lose control with too much sag. You can't do what you want to do with the flies underneath because you're kind of at the mercy of that sag. We also need to acknowledge that all these tight line systems in the first place are an effort to really eliminate the sag of a fly line hanging outside of your rod guides. So all of this really brings me to the heart of what we want to talk about today. Because if we don't like sag and drag, then why don't we just use the thinnest material all the time, right? But remember, leader design is a compromise. So if you choose to use the thinnest material, you're also choosing to use a leader that has no power. Now that's up to you where you put that compromise, but it really helps to understand the advantages and disadvantages of everything. So let's compare two leaders that are almost opposite in design. What I call the Troutbitten standard mono rig, which is built on a 20-pound butt section, then there's a taper, the sighter, and the tippet, versus a micro thin leader, which is built on a 5-pound butt section, no taper, straight to the sighter, and then some tippet. So the micro thin leader is fun to use because you know that you're going to have as little sag as you possibly can, as little leader sag as possible. You're going to the end of the line. You're going to the end of the road. You're as skinny on the leader as you can possibly get. So you can stop blaming sag and see if that makes a difference too. Using a micro rig really is very educational. You can learn a lot by getting a feel, seeing what it feels like to have a leader that hardly affects the drift of the fly at all. See what that feels like, understand what that looks like. You can learn a lot just by fishing that micro leader. You can see it's very, very little sag. There's always gonna be some sag. Anyway, this is at about 25, 26 feet. And that leader just is not influencing that fly very much at all, but some. And I am connected if I wanna be. All right, so what are the disadvantages of a micro leader? Well, there are a few, but it always comes down to a loss of power. What I have now is the micro leader. This is 5-pound red amnesia, and you can see that it just does not want to turn over at all. I have no real power or push in there, using pretty much the same stroke, trying to get it out there. It has no juice. Now, I said earlier that a powerful leader can push the fly to the target, and a powerful leader can even push itself. You can cast a powerful leader. That is the key. That right there is really the key to the whole thing. Hey, this video is sponsored by Squala. They're a new brand in fly fishing, and they're making some of the best apparel on the market today. Squala waders and jackets and pants and shirts are built for anglers who fish hard. Squala designs are about comfort combined with durability. Now let me show you how all of that kind of comes together in this carbon wading jacket. So the carbon jacket is fully waterproof, breathable, and it's extremely packable. What impresses me most is how the jacket holds its form. It doesn't hang on me like most lightweight jackets. It has structure, but it packs down easily and weighs less than 1 pound. The carbon is a perfect shell, great cuffs, and a hood that holds its shape. The jacket is waterproof and breathable while still being stretchy and flexible. The carbon jacket moves with you while fishing. So for a limited time, Squala wants to help the Troutbitten audience try them out. Just go to squalafishing.com and use the code Troutbitten10. Thanks to Squala for supporting the Troutbitten project and for keeping all of us comfortable and ready on the water. All right, so let me make this clear. I don't need power in the leader to get the flies to the target. On the micro leader, I don't need power built. It has no power, and I don't need it. I can get the flies to the target just like you can with a micro leader and be pretty accurate, very accurate. I don't need turnover. We'll talk about that. Turnover is really, I think, a misunderstood concept. Turnover comes, from casting a dry fly, getting the fly line to turn over, the leader turns over and pushes that air-resistant and unweighted fly to the target. When we have weight built into the system, you don't really need turnover in that way. In this case, with a micro leader, you have the weight of the fly, which is really doing the work of the cast. The fly, you cast that out there and it takes the leader with it. That's really what's happening with the micro leader. The micro leader doesn't have power. The weight of the fly is taking the leader with it. However, what I love about a powerful leader is the way that it does turn over. It does push the fly to the target. It pushes itself to the target. And I don't need to rely on the weight of a fly or split shot to make the cast. That's why for a long time I've said the Troutbitten mono rig is like a hybrid system. You can do both things. The leader can push things to a target, and then of course the weight of the fly is also kind of taking the leader with it. You kind of get the best of both worlds, kind of two things in one system. So I use the extra power in a standard mono rig to push everything into place. Think about a tuck cast. The fly goes out, fly first entry, and then I get to control, with a powerful leader, I can really control the angle of that tuck cast. Now you can tuck cast with a micro thin leader, but you're never going to get all of that control, all of those decisions. If you really want a steep tuck cast or you really want to fire it in, that's available to you with that more powerful leader. Also, if I'm casting to you, for example, I can put that tuck in, and then this alignment, this is key. Maybe I want to tuck the fly in and put the leader over this way, or maybe the opposite, have it turn that way. That alignment is just a really big deal. Think about it too, when I throw an indicator on, the powerful leader can push a yarn indie, it can push a dry dropper rig a lot easier. It's more comfortable to cast bigger streamers with a more powerful leader. Another thing with the indie, now this is really important. When I have the indie in the system, I want that alignment. If the river's going this way, I want the fly to go in, and then I want the indie to come down in the same seam. Let's say I can't, fish within my rod tip length, so I have to cast out and across more than I'd like to. Well, that's when this is really important. And I use the standard leader, a powerful leader, to get that fly to go in, and the leader still has momentum. There's still power and push and punch. The leader's still going over, and that's how I can get the indie in the same seam as the fly from the beginning. Along those same lines, that's the way I'll float the sighter. On a standard rig, I'll cast it out there, fly can go in first, and then the leader again still has momentum, and I can land the sighter in a straight line in the same seam as the fly. So the flies, the sighter, and then I'm back here at an angle. Again, that's not something you can really do with a micro thin leader. Of course, you can float the sighter with a micro thin leader, but you very much have to be everything in the same seam, and you kind of need to be within your rod tip reach. So one more thing with a powerful leader is that I can mend it. If I do choose to lay line on the water, maybe to an indie rig or If I'm fishing streamers and I want to mend, I can do that. Just like a fly line, you can mend a more powerful leader. So remember, when I talk about versatility in a standard mono rig, a lot of people think what I really mean by that is, adding an indie or making it a dry dropper rig or casting those streamers. And yeah, I love that rig because it's a great tool for those jobs. But I think what's even more important is, like I said, that alignment of the leader. After the fly goes in, how do you want everything to line up? Line up to the indie, line up this way, the degree of the tuck cast. All of those options are available when you have a more powerful leader with momentum in the cast. So what's the disadvantage of a thicker leader? Well, that's obvious. It's the sag, and it's something we have to deal with. But a little bit of sag doesn't have to destroy your presentation. There are ways to deal with it. Think about this, a 45-degree angle on your sighter. Anything from 45 degrees and inside, or let's say more vertical, the leader sag is almost inconsequential. Even with a very lightly weighted nymph at the end, from 45 degrees and like this, it hardly matters. Another way to deal with that sag is by getting a good tuck cast. When we tuck cast, we introduce a little bit of slack. We want to be slightly out of touch and allow that fly to free fall. Well, as it's free falling for 2 or 3, maybe 4 seconds, even if there's a little bit of leader sag up here in the air, it doesn't matter. And by the time you do kind of get that full and pure contact, let's say, you're probably back within your 45-degree range, and the sag doesn't matter. Also, I like to say that there is enough weight to counteract any leader sag. By adding a little bit of weight, you can take away the sag in that leader. Adding weight isn't a bad thing. Fishing light isn't inherently better. Often by adding a little bit of weight to the system, we have more control. Now you have to do the right things with that control. But if you're good at it, you can add some weight, take away the leader sag, and it's again inconsequential. So let's acknowledge too that there is always leader sag, no matter how thin the material is. I mean, you see in the shots of the micro leader here that the leader sags. Any material out there sags, but good anglers learn to deal with that sag. The key is to keep everything in one seam. When we're tight lining, I often say that the goal isn't necessarily to lead the flies, but just recover the slack that's given to you. And what you can do is kind of work with that sag, with that leader sag, and get the sag to kind of recover that slack or do the leading. If you think about it that way, I don't know, I think it really helps out. So I use the standard mono rig the most because I love the feel of casting that line, pushing things to a target, and then getting that placement, that alignment is a really big deal to me. I also love the fact that I can throw the indie on, throw a dry dropper, throw whatever streamers I want to do, and have a tool that really matches those tasks. But I carry and fish micro thin and thin leaders as well. I'll often switch to a micro leader to kind of take those questions out of the back of my mind, whether sag is kind of hurting me. I also switch to a micro leader just to kind of refocus me. And I like what I can learn from it. Again, you get that feel of, and you see what it really is like to have a leader that hardly influences the flies at all. And if I want less sag at more distance, I might choose a micro thin rig. I might also choose to stay with the standard rig and get a good tuck cast and float the sighter for the first 5 or 6 feet of the drift and then pick it up, and by then I'm in that 45-degree angle that we talked about. The point is there are a lot of different ways to do things, but understanding these advantages and disadvantages really helps you to make those decisions. The only way you're going to understand it is to go out there and really test all these rigs yourself. Tie them up, you can buy them on the Troutbitten shop, find somebody else's recipes and find what you like the best. But you have to test it, you have to figure it out for yourself, and you want to have an open mind and kind of test without bias. Also test until you really get a feel for the leader. You're not going to get it in a couple hours. It might take a couple days or even 10 days on the water before you can really get a feel for each of these leaders. I will say, I think it's difficult to start with a micro rig because it'll almost spoil you. You'll realize you'll be fishing with almost no leader sag, and then if you go to a standard rig, it can seem really tough. You say, oh, there's all that leader sag. You don't need to, but it can really help to start with a standard leader. Or if you fish a micro rig a lot right now, switch to a standard and really get a feel for it. Put the time in to learn how to manipulate, well, that extra power, to use that momentum, get the cast down with crisp stops and speed. learn to utilize really the benefits of that extra powerful leader. And then if you take that casting style over to the micro leader, you can really have something special. So don't trust me on this. Don't trust your buddy. Don't trust the guy at the fly shop. Go out and test this stuff for yourself and have fun while you're doing it. All right? Good luck out there and fish hard. So the micro thin leader is fun to use because, so the micro thin leader is fun to use because I'm gonna get it. I forget why it's fun to use.